How about another round of applause for the Academy and Stephen? So if you were with us on opening night for Viktor Ullmann's opera, you saw our next presenter in maybe a little different personality than he's going to display today. Or if you came to either of the showings of the film that we had this week, you've heard him talk. And the vocal recital on Thursday at the library was just fantastic. And we're so happy to have him with us this week. Ryan Hugh Ross.
Thank you very much, everybody. Well, my presentation is going to give a brief overview of sort of this massive generation of lost composers, and I've got a lot of material to cover, and I had to leave so much interesting stuff out, unfortunately. But let's get going. So today I'd like to share with you a bit about these four composers from similar backgrounds whose lives were forever altered by the Nazi regime's campaign of anti-Semitism and genocide. These four figures are Julius Burger, or Julius Burger as I like to refer to him, Walter Bricht, Walter Arlen, and Viktor Ullmann. While each share many parallels in their early life, their fates differ greatly. However, each lost generation figure offers a glimpse into this forgotten world of artists, musicians, and composers whose lives were upended in this volatile period. Many of these composers were poised to become the next torchbearers, but were forced into obscurity, and in some instances, murdered. Their music and stories languished until a handful of first began to emerge in the 1970s, and continues to reveal new insights, even now, 80 years after the end of World War II. So I'd like to start with my main focus. My research mostly focuses on Julius Burger. So he offers us the first perspective. Julius Burger was born 11th of March, 1897 in Vienna's 2nd district of Leopoldstadt, the 5th child of 9 to Josef Burger, a tailor, and Chaya Burger, a homemaker. While little known is known about Julius Burger's early life, he recollected in various interviews as having an enjoyable and carefree childhood, in which his parents put a strong emphasis on education. Each of the 9 children were afforded the opportunity to study. Burger attended gymnasium, or his primary school education, between 1908 and 1916. And while still a student at the illustrious Maximilian Gymnasium, Burger composed his first composition, a lied or song setting of Heinrich Heine poem, Dämmern liegt der Sommerabend. Ooh, didn't want to go forward yet. In 1916, he entered formal study at the Faculty of Arts at the University of Vienna, where he attended lectures with renowned musicologists Guido Adler and the Austrian and later British composer and musicologist Egon Walitz. Between 1917 and 1919, he went on to study at the Akademie für Musik und Darstellende Kunst Wien, now Universität, where he enrolled in courses in harmony, piano accompaniment, and the cello. Most notably, he also began studies in counterpoint and composition with famed Austrian composer Franz Schreker. And Schreker is today primarily remembered as an opera composer. During this period, Burger also employed in several side endeavors. 2 notable engagements include serving as an accompanist to Moravian tenor Leo Slezak on concert tour, as well as working as an accompanist in Vienna's silent cinemas. These theaters employed musicians to create the music soundtracks in real time, and Burger's exposure to these pastiche accompaniment practices may be one source of inspiration for his pioneering radio potpourri genre. In mid-1919, Burger decided to leave Vienna altogether and enroll at the Hochschule für Musik in Berlin in order to study with German composer Engelbert Humperdinck. This was short-lived, however, partially due to Humperdinck's poor health. And in early 1920, it was announced that Franz Schreker had been appointed the director of the Berlin Musikhochschule, prompting Burger to return to Vienna, where he rejoined his former teacher's studio and readied preparations for a more permanent move to Berlin in the autumn. Numerous other Schrecker students also followed to Berlin and were Burger's close colleagues, including Alois Heber, Jascha Hornstein, Ernst Krenek, Karl Rathaus, among others. After completing his formal studies in 1922, Burger found employment as a repetiteur for the Aberhaus in Karlsruhe, where he stayed until 1924. His abilities as a conductor were soon recognized by none other than Bruno Walter, who recommended Burger undertake an apprenticeship at the Metropolitan Opera in New York City. So, between 1924 and 1927, Burger assisted Met conductor Artur Bodansky and acted as a vocal coach for the company. And if you look on the left side here, you can see the recommendation. It says, I'll translate for you, it says, Herr Burger is an excellent musician at home in the opera and concert, a very good accompanist, a brilliant coach for singers, and deserves every recommendation. And over here you have, well, am I to that point yet? No. So in 1927, Burger returned to Berlin and gained employment at the Kroll Opera as an assistant to resident conductor Otto Klemperer, while simultaneously moonlighting for a period with the Berlin Funkstunde, or Berlin Radio Hour. So between 1930 and 1933, he transitioned full-time with the company as an arranger and composer. It seemed he had now gained a foothold as a composer and had several successes during this period. His symphonic overture Ozeanfahrt, or Ocean Journey, 1925, was broadcast in April 1931 as part of a larger orchestral concert. Equally, he had two commercial successes in the form of Lieder penned for his friend, Austro-Hungarian and Romanian tenor Joseph Schmidt. These titles included his melancholic Zigeunerlied, or Gypsy Song, and his Launisches Glück, which was inspired by Johann Strauss. The latter utilized thematic material from Johann Strauss and was incorporated into a new production of an operetta, 1001 Nights. It also appeared in 1933 German film Ein Lied geht um die Welt, starring Joseph Schmidt. And here is a short little clip from that film. If I could get it going. Hopefully we don't have any more issues here. Are we gonna go? No, maybe not. It's good by any time. I'll see if I can get it going at the end, maybe. We'll do that. So on to our next perspective. Our second composer was also Viennese born, is Walter Bricht. He was born the 21st of September, 1904, into an accomplished and well-connected musical family. His father, Baldwin Bricht, was a respected music critic for the Volkszeitung newspaper, as well as a political editor on the conservative Catholic paper Volksblatt. Baldwin's critical music performance evaluations were said to be admired by fellow critic Julius Korngold, father of operatic and later Hollywood film composer Erich Korngold. Walter's mother, Agnes Peilemann, was a child prodigy pianist who later established herself as a popular singer of operatic and concert repertoire. She is credited with premiering many selections of Lieder by Max Reger, Hans Pfitzner, Hugo Wolf, and of course, Gustav Mahler in recital. She also premiered the soprano solo in the Te Deum movement of Bruckner's Ninth Symphony. Agnes regularly sang with singers such as Leo Slezak, you probably heard that name already, and Joseph Schmidt, both of which who had friendships with Julius Burger. A second interesting connection is that both Burger and Walter Bricht served as Slezak's accompanists at different points. Agnes's family line was well ingrained in the European musical life. To give just a few examples, her grandfather was a musician and had a close friendship with Friedrich Wieck, Clara Schumann's father. Agnes was also reportedly counted composer Johannes Brahms as a personal friend and was encouraged to make the transition from piano to voice by another close friend, Johann Strauss. The environment was a fertile ground upon which Walter Bricht began to nurture his musical pursuits. And if you see the picture on the far left here, here's Baldwin Bricht, Agnes, a young Walter Bricht, and his sister Francesca. And here's obviously Walter Bricht and a young Agnes pictured there. Now let's hope that this one plays. That was an excerpt from Bricht's Verwähnte Blätter, number 3, Stürmisch bewegt. I jumped the gun on that one a little bit, my apologies. His early education was undertaken at the Akademische Gymnasium, and he continued his studies at the Vienna Academy for Music, where he studied composition with Austro-Hungarian cellist, pianist, and composer Franz Schmidt. According to fellow student conductor Walter Tausig, Bricht was Schmidt's favorite student, and it is apparent that much of Bricht's music style was influenced by his former mentor. Bricht graduated from the Vienna Academy in 1928 and became well known as a chamber musician and composer. His career as a composer and performer was poised for success during the late 20s and early 1930s, with many internationally recognized music organizations eagerly taking up his compositions. He also, and I already mentioned this, but he also continued to perform as an accompanist to prominent soloists of the day, including Leo Slezak. Notable pieces which received prominent premieres during this period include his Piano Concerto No. 1, which premiered with the Vienna Philharmonic in 1929, orchestral work, which we heard and just previously, and that was the Fort Wayne Philharmonic and recorded in 2018. In 1931, he also began teaching counterpoint, composition, and form at Vienna's Conservatory, a position he held until 1938. On to our next, Walter Arlen or Walter Optowitzer, the third perspective. He comes from a generation younger than the previous two. Walter Arlen, as I will refer to him as, was born on July 31st, 1920, to a prominent merchant family. Walter's grandfather, Leopold Dichter, owned the Kaufhaus Dichter, a department store in the working class district of Ottakring, and Walter, or Arlen, lived with his parents and his sister Edith in the top floor of this apartment building. Walter Arlen said of this period, "I grew up in an atmosphere of great joy as far as I was concerned. Music was always present in the home, and his mother played piano, his uncle played fiddle, and he was 8 when his parents took him to his first opera, Tosca, by Puccini. It bowled me over," he said. "That was the beginning of me wanting to be a composer." The budding musician took piano lessons and sang in school, and Walter's younger sister, Edith, was also artistically gifted and attended the State Opera Ballet School, where she studied with Gret Wiesenthal. And in 1934, she danced with Richard Tauber in the world premiere of Franz Lehar's Juditha. In the summers, the family went to their large villa in Bad Sauerbrunn on the Hungarian border, surrounded by cherry and apricot orchards. Very idyllic. Walter's fondest memories were of summers spent playing with local children and enjoying the beauty of eastern Austria. So this is a young Walter Arlen with his sister and his grandfather and his cousin Peter, also Walter Arlen, and this is a larger picture with family members of an extended family. The fourth perspective is the composer Viktor Ullmann. Unlike the other 3 composers examined who were Viennese-born, Ullmann was born in Teschin in what is now the Czech Republic on January 1st, 1898. Ullmann's father, Maximilian, was an officer in the Austrian Imperial Army and stationed in Teschen, and his mother was Malwein Ullmann, a homemaker. Viktor's birth was registered with a Catholic community in Teschen, where he was later baptized on the 21st of January. Prior to Ullmann's birth, his father, who was of Jewish heritage, had officially renounced his faith and converted to Catholicism in order to advance his military career as an officer in the Austrian army. In 1909, Viktor, now aged 11, moved with the family to Vienna and was enrolled in the Radomovsky Grammar School. His aptitude for music was recognized here at an early age, and during his final 2 years at grammar school, Ullmann studied piano under Edvard Sturman and received theory and composition lessons from Arnold Schoenberg's student, Dr. Josef Pollnauer. After completing his studies, Ullmann also enlisted in the Austro-Hungarian army like his father and was later decorated for bravery for his services on the Asonzo front. After the conclusion of World War I, Ullmann enrolled at the Vienna University not as a composition student, but as a law student, and resumed his piano lessons with his former teacher. That same year, he joined Arnold Schoenberg's world-renowned Seminar for Composition, where his classmates included, among others, Hans Eisler and Josef Travenek. At the request of Arnold Schoenberg, Ullmann began a founding member of the committee of the Association for Private Musical Performances, and through Schoenbergian circles, the young composer also became acquainted with the composer and conductor Alexander von Zemlinsky. And you can see both of his influences there. In May 1919, after studying with Schoenberg for less than a year, Ullmann married his fellow composition student, Martha Koreff, and left university and abruptly moved to Prague. The following year, Zemlinsky offered Ullmann a position of chorus master and repetiteur at the German Theater in Prague, and Zemlinsky later expanded Ullmann's responsibilities to include conducting. In 1922, Ullmann was appointed the theater's primary conductor, a position which he held until 1927. Now, Ullmann continued composing throughout this period and debuted several of his early compositions. His most notable piece was the variations in double fugue on a piano piece by Arnold Schoenberg, based on the composer's Opus 19, number 4. This was premiered at the festival of the ISCM in Geneva, and the performance also brought Ullmann to international attention. And I also like to note, an orchestrated version of this work was later awarded the prestigious Emil Herzke Gedächtnispreis in 1934. So slowly building his resume. In fall 1927, Ullmann took a short-term engagement as musical director in Ústí nad Labem. But after one season, Ullmann returned to Prague. And between 1929 and 1931, he moved again, this time to Zurich's Schauspielhaus, working as a conductor and composer of incidental music. Although he was gaining success in composition career, and his pieces were now being performed in many European countries, Ullmann began to divert his attention to spirituality and esoteric paths of knowledge. And between 1931 and 1938, he ceased musical activity altogether and dedicated himself fully to the study of Rudolf Steiner's anthropophagy movement and ran an anthroposophical bookstore. That's a tongue twister for you. Ullmann's sojourn in Germany between 1931 and 1933 was an important time of introspection for him. And we have already touched on these two fine characters, and of course that's Viktor Ullmann, but this is his first wife, Martha Koreff. However, events were being set into motion which would create a cataclysmic rupture for these artists and wider society. This, of course, was the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party into power in 1933 Germany. To understand how this lost generation came to be so quickly disenfranchised, I have compiled a brief overview of the events which caused the fall of the democratic Weimar Republic into an authoritarian dictatorship. I refer to this 1933 event as the first rupture. After leading an unsuccessful insurrection against the government in the Beer Hall Putsch in November 1923, Hitler was sentenced and jailed for his treasonous crimes. He used his time in incarceration to refine his approach for a government takeover which would utilize the very democratic processes and safeguards enshrined in the Weimar Republic's constitution. This plan harnessed the disenfranchised German public's anger and caused by, among other things, the economic depression and joblessness. Hitler took office as Chancellor, as we all know, on January 31st, 1933, and in his first cabinet meeting, he argued for the passage of the Empowering Law, which would dismantle separation of powers and give him emergency executive authority to make laws without parliamentary approval. This would effectively bypass the constitutional process. Hitler claimed this would give him the authority to make good on his campaign promises to revive the economy, reduce unemployment, increase military spending and production, withdraw from international obligations, and purge the country of foreigners, Jews included, whom he claimed were, quote, poisoning the blood of the nation. It does sound a bit familiar, doesn't it? After a slow start, Hitler and the Nazis were presented with a crisis which they could use to jumpstart their plans. This was, of course, the Reichstag fire of 27th February 1933. The Reichstag fire decree, designed to suspend civil liberties, allow search and seizure of all citizens, and to curb state rights, was signed into law the following day. On March 5th, German voters went to the polls, and while Nazi Party parliamentarian seats surged, they still did not reach a 51% threshold. So on March 28th, the enabling law, now called the, quote, law to remedy the distress of the people of the Reich, was pitched to the Reichstag. It was opposed by the largest opposition party, the Social Democrats, who either abstained or voted against the law. Even as other parties concerned with the curtailment of judicial independence, due process, freedom of press, and equal rights, they generally went along with the legislation. It was passed with a 4/5 majority, and with it, Hitler largely succeeded in dismantling the Federated Constitutional Republic of Weimar and could rule now by decree. So how did this affect these composers? Of the many executive decrees which followed, those issued in April 1933 were particularly harmful in the case of these composers. Bürger and Bricht more so, as they had more international exposure. However, Bricht's Jewish lineage was not yet known even to him. In April 1933, non-Aryans, in quotes, were banned from holding government jobs and purged from the federal employment. A second blow of April 1933 prohibited Jews from holding any position in the arts and cultural spheres, including radio, the theaters, and including selling artwork. Bürger fell into both of these categories as a Jew and a federal employee at the state-owned Funkstunde AG Berlin. After returning to Vienna for several months, he found work with the BBC in London, where he pioneered a new radio genre he deemed radio potpourri. So the Nazis really went about this in two phases. The period between 33 and 38 delineated the Nazi regime's phase one, and this was used to establish virtual control of all political, social, and cultural activities. It also included reshaping education and cultural institutions such as theaters, museums, libraries, etc., to align with the party ideology. Book burnings and expungement of those deemed undesirable from public life became the way forward. 2 years later, on the 15th of September 1935, the Nuremberg laws were enacted. This deprived legal rights to all Jews in Germany. The Nazis eventually moved on to phase two in 1938, with the following goals: to expand outside the current German state borders into neighboring territories for Lebensraum, or living room. This included a concerted effort to reclaim territories lost by the Versailles Treaty, and Austria was the first country or territory subsumed into the Reich in March 1938, and shortly followed by the Sudetenland, or the German-speaking part of the Czechoslovakia. Back to Julius Burger. So between 1933 and 1938, Burger had a great success writing numerous radio programs for the BBC Variety Department. He called these radio potpourri, or radio potpourri. They consisted of a collection of pieces or excerpt themes from pre-existing works, which are then arranged together in a collage piece around a predetermined theme or subject. While he didn't invent the potpourri genre, because composers have been making these since the early 18th century, Burger took the device and remediated it, the traditional form, by expanding its length, incorporating a storyline and narration over a tapestry of musical themes, specifically for the medium of radio. And here are some advertisement examples of these works from Radio Times magazine. You have Holiday in Europe, 1934, Life of Offenbach, which used material from all of Offenbach's works to tell a biographic story of his life. Themes of London, which incorporates 400 years of British music woven in to show the transition of London's history over time, and a festival of folk music, which is any of you have ever seen Eurovision? It's like a really early version of Eurovision. And while Burger was having some success as a arranger in the UK, his personal life was not so bright. Burger and his wife, Rosa Blaustein, lived a precarious existence from short-let stays in hotel rooms between Brussels and Vienna, with increasingly longer stays between Paris and London. Because of his status as a freelance or per-contract arranger and composer, Burger was not allowed to remain in the UK longer than a handful of weeks at a time. This timeline of known correspondence addresses illustrates this precarious nature. So even if you just glance at it, it's just too many to take in at once. But there are over 30 addresses over the span of 8 years through 6 countries and 2 continents. Ooh. So you can glance at that a little longer. I have a really brief story about Burger's most close call. One story highlights how Burger and his wife came close to disaster. In 1938, rumors of a plebiscite vote on Austria's annexation began circulating, and the Burgers decided to travel to Vienna to vote against this action. While at a scheduled stopover in France, Julius noticed a newspaper headline exclaiming, "Austrian Chancellor meets Hitler." The couple saw this as a bad omen and immediately fled the train, abandoning their plans to travel to Vienna. They instead traveled to the southern France, where Burger completed his next radio potpourri, an ode to the British Empire entitled "The Empire Sings." By the end of March, Austria was subsumed into the fascist German Reich, and with it, the Jewish population immediately lost their rights as citizens. Here is a picture of Walter Bricht's passport from the late 30s. In 1938, Walter Bricht learned that, according to the new Nazi government of Austria and the Nuremberg laws, he was not a Lutheran, as he had been raised, but rather legally recognized as a Jew, having had Jewish grandparents. He now no longer enjoyed the same rights and freedoms as a non-Jew in his own country. This came as a complete surprise. As a consequence, some of his works began to disappear from performance lists, including 12 March 1938 Vienna Philharmonic performance of his clavier concert in A minor. His symphony in A minor, also scheduled for performance in Berlin, Dresden, and Vienna, were all cancelled within days of the Anschluss. Bricht saw little future in Europe, and decided his only option was to emigrate, and he began the process of procuring the necessary documentation. Days after his departure, he received a message from the Nazi Cultural Ministry offering him the status of, quote, honorary Aryan, provided he swore allegiance to Adolf Hitler and the regime. Bricht refused and instead left the United States in July 1938. And here's a brief clip from his, where did we go? Brief clip from his symphony in A minor, also by Fort Wayne Philharmonic in 2018. Sorry, I'm going to cut it a little short because I've got a bit to go yet. So Walter Arlen's personal experience during this volatile period brings the painful reality of this rupture caused by the Nazi takeover into probably the most clearest focus. Arlen, still Ottowitzer, was only 13 when Austria's democracy came crashing down under the Dollfuss regime, and later Schuschnigg authoritarian governments, and a mere 17 years old when the Nazis marched in. Walter recalled waking the day of the Anschluss, and as usual, the following day, Saturday morning, Walter's mother went downstairs to help out in the leather goods department of the family's department store, only to be informed by the principal sales clerk, Frau Frank, that she, quote, no longer had any right to be in the store. Walter's mother went back upstairs, devastated that employees who she was friendly with had suddenly turned on her. Walter remembers his mother weeping inconsolably. Later, the same Frau Frank from Leather Goods had provided her SS friends with keys to the Dichter apartments. Walter recalled while banging on the door in the middle of the night, Nazi thugs burst in and stole all the money and jewelry they found. They beat Walter's father and stole his valuable stamp collection, and then they turned toward Walter and beat him before deciding to, quote, leave the little Jew alone. They then took Walter's father to Gestapo headquarters. On the following Monday, the situation quickly unraveled even further. Crowds gathered outside the department store and shouted anti-Semitic obscenities. The family remained in the apartments, too afraid to venture out. Then, a man arrived named Edmund Topolansky. He informed the family that he was the new Aryan owner of the store. No official purchase was necessary, and the family would have to relocate to a nearby pension with 2 rooms. After the Anschluss, after Austria's annexation by Germany, the Dichter Villa, near the Hungarian border, was taken over by the local Nazi party. And when Soviet forces were making their advances in the waning days of World War II, the Nazi soldiers burned the estate down so that the files and records could not be used against them later. With Arlen's father now detained and facing deportation to Dachau, and with the family's displacement, his mother had a total nervous breakdown. Arlen eventually was able to admit his mother to a sanatorium where she remained for the next 5 weeks. He was allowed to visit his father in prison once before his deportation to Dachau and described the conditions as subhuman. Weeks later, one of Arlen's aunts found funds to pay for his release from Dachau, and Arlen's father had hardly returned to Vienna when he was rounded up by one of the frequent, quote, Jew hunting raids that took place, and he was sent to Buchenwald. Here's a picture of a young Walter Arlen in his late teens, and here's a sketch of the Dichter department store, which I think they tore down in the late 2000s. One final personal account from Arlen also illuminates the horrors of November 1938, better known as Kristallnacht. Arlen composed this piano nocturne as a way of coping with the horrific events of that evening. And this is played by Daniel Winikowski, pardon me. This is his an excerpt from his Kristallnacht Nocturne number 1. After their fateful diversion, the Burgers instead traveled to London in mid-April 1938. The administration of the BBC Variety Department immediately made an urgent appeal on the couple's behalf to the British Home Office, but this too was rejected. The composer instead chose to apply to asylum in the United States and was allowed to remain in the UK while this process was pending. This proved successful with an affidavit of support from an American tenor, Charles Ullmann, and the Burgers left the United Kingdom via the port of Southampton on the 20th of March 1939, bound for New York City. They eventually settled into an apartment in Queens, and within a few months, Julius found employment as a freelance arranger with Columbia Broadcasting System, or CBS, in the early 1940s, where he primarily worked with conductors, and I know you will know these names, Andrei Kostelanetz and Arthur Fiedler. So Burger continued to compose for the BBC, creating 2 further radio potpourri, the New World Rhapsody and the Victorian Rhapsody. The Victory Rhapsody. The latter was composed in anticipation of the Nazi Germany's defeat and was broadcast as part of the BBC's week-long VE Day celebrations. Another piece, so something a bit more peppy here, another piece which Burger composed in the 1940s was his Romanian Fantasy. This piece was taken up and recorded by Kostelanetz and released on Columbia Masterworks label in 1944. It draws on inspiration from Romanian folk tunes, and it's reminiscent of George Enescu's Romanian Rhapsody number 1. So something a bit different now. Here's a picture of the manuscript, which is in Vienna. We've also found fragments of it in New York City, as well as the Library of Congress. Hold on, everybody. Here goes. I don't think I'd want to be a piccolo player in that piece. I'm really happy to say that that piece will be revived next year for a concert of Burger's music in Vienna again, and likely broadcast by the Vienna Symphony Orchestra, or Radio Symphony Orchestra. So back to Walter Bricht. Bricht's self-imposed exile would have been challenging in the best of circumstances. Despite having no English language skills, although he had Latin, Greek, French, Italian, and Dutch, he had few personal connections in the United States and only $4 in his pocket. He and his wife settled in New York City and he found work as an organist, accompanist, and coach. However, the stresses of starting his career over, coupled with acclimating to a new culture, took its toll. A short time after his arrival, Bricht's wife and performance partner Ella Kugel filed for divorce. Despite these devastating setbacks, he continued to pursue academic employment, and the following year, in 1939, Bricht joined the faculty at Mason College in Charleston, West Virginia. Shortly thereafter, he became a chairman of the music department, and it was during his time at Mason College that Bricht met Donna Kuhn, a professor of violin. The two later married and had two daughters, Dana, who is a flautist in the Tulsa Symphony Orchestra still, and his other daughter, Wendy. In 1944, the same year he became a U.S. citizen, Walter moved the family back to New York City, where he assumed a faculty position at the New School of Music, teaching piano and voice. There's a lovely picture of Dana playing a duet with her father there. And this is Donna Kuhn, his Walter's second wife. Arlen's experience obtaining the necessary documentation in order to leave the Third Reich offers a clear picture of the struggles presented in this perilous period. As Austria no longer existed, he needed to obtain a German passport in order to leave the country. Because of the crowds of people hoping also to leave, Arlen went the night before his appointment. It snowed that evening, and when day broke, the SS man walked down the line of people, singling out elderly, frail Orthodox Jews. The soldier then gave them shovels and told them to get to work. Walter Arlen recalls, one old man couldn't or wouldn't and simply leaned on his shovel. The SS man shouted abuse, and when he didn't respond, the SS man hit him with the butt of his rifle. Blood went everywhere, and once the man lay unconscious on the ground, the SS guard cocked his rifle and shot him. Walter, only 18 years old at this point, remembers the horror of a bright blue winter sky, the white snow, and the red blood. These traumas would follow him throughout his life. On the 14th of March, 1939, the day before his visa was to expire, he boarded a train to the Italian city of Trieste, from which he sailed over the next 2 weeks on the Vulcana to New York. He didn't know if he would ever see his family again. Upon arriving in New York, Arlen then bought a bus ticket and traveled to Chicago, where he met with relatives of the Pritzker family. You may recognize that last name. A descendant of this relative is now the governor of Illinois. As Arlen himself explained, as soon as I arrived in Chicago, Fanny, a Pritzker, who is extremely concerned and supportive of us, her close relatives, whisked me off to Walzer and Company, her furrier on Michigan Avenue, and told them to give me a job. And there's his first boss, Mr. Hymanson. In December 1941, he was later assigned to the war effort in a chemical factory, but the stress was so debilitating, he suffered physical symptoms, losing his hair, and fell into a deep depression. Finally, back to Ullmann. So with the Nazi establishment of the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia in 1939, which effectively brought Czechoslovakia under German control, the political situation became increasingly dire. The Nuremberg laws, which had now only been applicable under the German Reich, were now applied throughout the regions in Czechoslovakia under jurisdiction of the Protectorate. With it, Viktor Ullmann abandoned attempts to get his award-winning opera, The Fall of the Antichrist, staged in Prague. He instead directed efforts towards procuring emigration visas for his family, which now included his second wife Annie Winternitz, whom he had married in 1931, and their sons Max and Johannes, as well as their daughter Felicia. Ullmann appealed for help in a series of letters written to friends and colleagues in places as far away as South Africa. But by the end of 1939, he had exhausted all possibilities for immigration. Ullmann and his wife made the decision to send the two oldest children, Felicia and Johannes, on the Kindertransport to England through the British Committee for Children in Prague. Although Ullmann continued to compose during this period, his personal circumstances grew increasingly serious with the finalization of his divorce from Annie in August 1941. Ullmann, who was already stateless, became single, making him particularly vulnerable to the threat of deportation. So he made a last-ditch effort and married his new girlfriend, Elisabeth Frankel-Meisel, on the 15th of October 1941. But this protection was temporary, however, and the following year, in September 1942, Ullmann and his new wife Elisabeth were deported to Terezin, or Theresienstadt, as it was named by the Nazis, a concentration and transit camp located near Prague. For a short time, he lived near his two previous wives and one of his sons, who had been sent to Terezin also. And as many of you know, Theresienstadt was established in the walled fortress town of Terezin in Czechoslovakia. The camp was cruelly advertised by the Nazi government as a spa town alternative for well-to-do Jewish. Some even paid steep fees to be sent there instead of the overpacked ghettos dotted around Poland and the occupied territories. But Theresienstadt was no spa retreat. It had terrible sanitary conditions and rampant disease, food shortages that left those imprisoned within the walls of the walled town in poor circumstances. Despite its horrible conditions, this dark place had a vibrant cultural life, as many prisoners were established artists whose disappearances would raise further suspicions to the world organizations. The camp was even the subject of a Nazi propaganda film in the autumn of 1944, an attempt by the Nazi regime to alleviate the global community's concerns brought on by rumors of the death camps in the East. In reality, this place served as a major way station on transport lines to these very death camps. While in prison at Theresienstadt, Ullmann composed 23 works, the vast majority of his entire output. These include 3 piano sonatas, a string quartet, arrangements of Jewish songs for chorus, incidental music for dramatic productions, his one-act opera, which we saw earlier this week, Der Kaiser von Atlantis, as well as his final work, a melodrama based on Rilke's Die Weis von Liebe. And I've got and here is a map of Theresienstadt. If you can see, it kind of does look like a star, and that's his transit papers. I've just got this little example here. It's a song he wrote in the camp called Es schleppt mein Schuh. I'll translate it for you quickly. My shoe drags itself heavily in the snow, but I walk on. The hot tear does not soften the hard layer, it freezes into ice. The body falls. The straight path, the spirit, tighten still pauses. How I feel, a divine seed secretes secretly at the cold pole. I'm only going to play a little portion of it.
True.
So the effects on the family of these, particularly these three individuals. Julius Burger lost 4 of his brothers and his elderly mother, Chaya, in the Holocaust. A 5th brother's fate still remains unknown, and we cannot find any documentation. This tragic blow prompted Julius to dedicate the 2nd Adagio movement of his concerto for cello and orchestra to his mother's memory. After the war's conclusion, Burger no longer wrote many original works, possibly due to the lack of time and the different style preferences in New York City. He instead mainly focused on arranging for paychecks. And this is one of Julius's brothers, Solomon, who actually escaped to Sweden, was kicked out, went to France, was rounded up and sent to one of the death camps. Walter Bricht's sister, Franziska, managed to emigrate to the United Kingdom in 1940 and settled in Oxford, England. And there she is in the center. Bricht's mother, Agnes, survived the war but died in 1950 in Austria. Walter Arlen, unknown to Walter Arlen, his father had managed to get out of Buchenwald, and together with his mother, her father, and Walter's sister, Edith, they escaped to London, where his friend Paul Hamburger was able to help them find accommodation. Arlen's grandmother was not so fortunate and was murdered in Treblinka by the Nazis in 1942. Arlen's mother could not acclimate to the major changes as an expat and later died of suicide. For Viktor Ullmann, his main priority was always been his children before he was detained. Thanks to the efforts of the British Kindertransport, spearheaded by Sir Nicholas Winton, the Ullmann children, Johannes and daughter Felicia, managed to escape to England. Their youngest brother, Ullmann's younger son, Max, would stay with them. Both Johannes, 5, and Felicia, 2, survived the war in foster care, but then the separation from their parents in such an early age caused them severe trauma that left them both emotionally and cognitively stunted. They both were institutionalized and lived out their lives in England in adult homes. Viktor Ullmann, his wife Elizabeth, and their son Max were sent to Auschwitz in October 1944, where they were murdered. I'm going to skip this next clip because you heard it on Wednesday. It's the final quartet from Der Kaiser von Atlantis. But this is Max, Felicia, and Johannes. Some a bit happier outcomes here. After the war, Burger continued to arrange for CBS, and in 1948 he made his conducting debut on Broadway for the premiere of the operetta Song of Norway. The following year, 1949, Burger returned to the staff of the Metropolitan Opera as an assistant conductor and vocal coach, and worked in the capacity until his retirement in 1969. Here he was surrounded with a collegiate staff largely comprised of fellow emigres, including assistant chorus master and friend of Walter Bricht, Walter Tausig, among others. In his capacity as a repetiteur and coach, Burger worked with many well-known singers of the day. Notable examples include the famed contralto Marian Anderson, whom he coached for her 1955 debut at Verdi's Un ballo in maschera. Burger also enjoyed collegial friendships with American bass Jerome Hines, pictured here as the costumed giant Russian. And the pair became well known for their comedic concert antics as part of the Metropolitan's post-performance receptions. Burger's skills as an arranger and composer were also occasionally drawn upon at the company. In 1944, Rudolf Bing commissioned Burger to create a one-act ballet with ballet master Zachary Soloff, and the result was Vittorio. It has mixed reviews, as you can kind of see by somebody scribbling here. I won't repeat what that says. After the war, Bricht retained his position at the New School of Music until 1963, and then was offered a professorship at the School of Music in Indiana University as a professor of piano. While Bricht's primary focus was his university work, he continued to perform and gave regular solo piano recitals, including chamber music works with the Gordon String Quartet. His playful nature and quick-witted mannerisms made him a popular choice as performer and mentor. One of his ex-students, former Metropolitan Opera conductor and fellow emigre Walter Taussig, was quoted as saying, "If I have anything of value to all to offer as a musician, if there's anything of quality in the way that I read music, make music, or teach music, I owe it all, 100% to Walter Bricht." Following the war, Walter Arlen continued his musical therapy, and for a further 3 years, as with his therapist, concluded that Walter needed to study music if there was any hope of him preserving his sanity. Somehow he managed private lessons with Leo Sowerby, possibly America's most famous church musician, and today is remembered as the first organist of Washington National Cathedral. The end of the war and his family's arrival in the United States meant that he could now have the opportunity of living and working with American composer Roy Harris and his pianist wife Johanna. And Arlen traveled all over the world with them in his studies. He continued his studies in composition at Vanderbilt University and then went on to the University of California in Los Angeles, where he graduated with a master's degree in 1955. After concluding his studies, Arlen decided to become a music critic instead of a composer and registered for a course taught by UCLA by Albert Goldberg, critic at the Los Angeles Times. Arlen's life and occupation put him in contact with an incredible array of German-speaking emigres who were living in the greater Los Angeles, including Thomas Mann, Hans Eisler, Bertolt Brecht, Leon Feuchtwanger, Heinrich Mann, Erich Korngold, Arnold Schoenberg, just to name a few. And if you look at this picture over here, we have not only Aaron Copland, but Lucas Voss, and this is Anne Mahler, Gustav Mahler's daughter, and there's Walter Bricht there, or Walter Arlen, excuse me. On the right, Lucas Voss there. On the 11th of May, 1958, Arnold met Howard Myers, who would become Arlen's long-life companion. Myers had come along as a guest of another composer, and after the performance, told Arlen how much he loved his songs. Arlen asked if he wanted to accompany him to one of the concerts, which he was next to review, and Myers agreed. And they were together until Arlen's death in 2023. And this is Walter Arlen. He established the music department at Loyola Marymount in the 1950s as well. So I'm paraphrasing now because I know we're running out of time. Thank you for sticking with me. Arlen's return to composition is best described in his own words. When I came close to retirement and took a sabbatical in 1986, I happened to read these 5 poems by St. John of the Cross, as sensitively translated from Spanish by Howard Myers. They changed my life, and immediately I started sketching the first song, Ah, Who Can Cure Me? I completed it within days and went on to set the other 4 poems, and I remember to this day how easy and spontaneous it was. The 5 Songs of Love and Yearning is my title. Back to Bürger. Bürger's return to composition came in 1967 after having long given up on original composing. Many of his dated manuscripts from this point onward showed a burst of creativity in which he wrote numerous works and revised older ones. These included 10 chamber works, 3 string quartets, arranged in original vocal pieces with a piano accompaniment, as well as vocal and orchestral pieces, and 3 choral works. In 1984, at aged 87, Bürger's orchestral work, Variations on a Theme by Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, won first prize at Indiana State University's Contemporary Music Festival competition. The work received its premiere on the 27th of September of that year in Tilson Music Hall. After the 1987 success in Indiana, Bürger returned to New York City, and his life largely reverted to as it was before. Then in 1989, tragedy struck when his wife of over 50 years, Rosal, passed away. A grief-stricken Bürger, now in his 90s, traveled into Manhattan, via the subway to meet with probate attorney Ronald S. Pohl, and a unique friendship ensued. Ronald recalls this meeting in the following clip from a documentary that I made in 2021 called Julius Burger, A Journey in Exile.
It seems to just do its own thing.
So I sent this man I had never met before an email, and to my great surprise, he wrote me back and he said, well, I really like this project, why don't we talk a little bit? And that was the start. Ron came all the way out from New York City and helped sponsor this, which is above and beyond.
It started off actually rather ordinary. I received a phone call from a referrer, a broker that I knew, and he says, I have an old gentleman who needs to have some matters settled for his wife who had died. His wife for 60 years, he was quite broken up, and this gentleman shows up. I felt something for him, and he would smile. He had some kind of a charm to him, and I said, you know, Julius, you look like my grandfather. So during the conversation, he explained to me a little bit about his history. He was a music student in Vienna, he was in Berlin, and then he worked for the BBC, then he came to the United States, and he worked at the Metropolitan Opera, then he coached the most famous opera stars of the 20th century, including Marian Anderson. And he told me particularly that he had a cello concerto, the Adagio, he wanted to hear before he died. And he had dedicated it posthumously to his mother, who died and was shot in Auschwitz. And we made an arrangement to play the cello concerto, the Adagio, for Julius in his apartment. Julius was there, his usual smiling self, and he said, okay, Julius, this is my advisor. She's going to play the Adagio for you. So he sat at the piano, the light is coming down at him, and they started to play this piece. And immediately, the emotion of hearing this music live again is overwhelming him, and he starts sobbing, and I don't know how he managed to play the piece because his eyes were so watery and he was emotionally so moved by it, but he went through it, and there was a huge pregnant pause at the end, and it was just an amazing moment. And I was determined that this has to be played. We have to get this played in an orchestral setting. I ended up organizing a concert at Alice Tully Hall in Lincoln Center. We got the Orchestra of St. Luke's, and we have Paul Dunkel, an excellent conductor, and we ended up putting together a whole program of his music in early 90s.
92, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it got great reviews, and he was the star for the evening, and the music was just absolutely fantastic. And that started the journey, and my goal was to have him hear as much of his music as possible before he died.
So this amazing revival began to gain momentum, and numerous concerts began to take place across the US, Europe, and Israel. And in 1994, Burger, aged now 97, flew to Berlin to hear his concert, a concert of his orchestral works at the Jesus Christus Kirche in Berlin. And a recording was made by this, and very much later was released in 2007 with Toccata Classics. On the 12th of June 1995, Julius Burger passed away, having heard many of his own major works performed. Now, there's been tons of recordings out. The earliest was 2 years ago of the big Austrian premiere. I've recorded some of his unpublished Lieder, which is floating out there somewhere if you're interested. But I also have one claim to fame with Julius, and that is these. These are his radio potpourri. So we thought they were lost in 1940 when the Blitz happened in London and a bomb went right into a broadcasting house. But I'm like a dog with a bone with things, so I kept digging, and we found 5,000 plus pages of handwritten manuscript of his radio potpourri, which after some negotiating, the BBC released them, and they are now also with Burger's collection in Vienna.
It seems
There we go. So Walter Bricht's return to composition came a year after his arrival in Indiana, after a decades-long hiatus. While Bricht appeared to be regaining his drive for composition, his health began to decline and after developing emphysema. And after a lengthy battle with the disease, Walter Bricht died in 20th of March, 1970, at the age of 65. But Bricht's rediscovery came in the late 2000s when his daughter, Dana Bricht, and Wendy approached Dr. Michael Haas and Dr. Gerald Gruber about the possibility of safeguarding their father's manuscripts. This estate became the catalyst that resulted in the Exiled Arte Center for Band Music at Vienna's University of Music and Performing Arts. After receiving generous grants from various organizations as well as the Austrian government, the center was established in the building that made up Vienna's Historic Music Academy, where many of these composers attended their undergraduates. And this facility includes renovated vaults, an exhibition center, a lecture hall, and performance facilities. And if you ever get to Vienna, check it out. It's amazing. This is probably the most recent recording of Walter Bricht by the Fort Wayne Philharmonic, and it's very positively typed Volume 1. Volume 2, I don't even think is in the works, but we can hope, right? So Walter Arlen's rediscovery was also thanks to Dr. Michael Haas and Dr. Gruber. There's a really wonderful story, which I won't delve into, of how Michael Haas met Howard Myers, and Howard said, "You've got to hear some of this music. Don't let Walter know." But Michael loved the music, and a concert of Walter's music was performed at a special ceremony marking the 70th anniversary of the Nazi annexation of Austria in 2008, which set off Walter's new lease on life. And here you have Ronald Pohl, my good friend who owns the Bürger estate, Walter Arlen in the middle, myself and my wife here. But the exciting part is, I think you might, well, you can't really read it, but our MahlerFest fearless leader, Kenneth Woods, this is his most recent recording of Walter Arlen's works, and here we'll hear a little excerpt from it. I believe it's sung by Thomas Moll and the English Symphony Orchestra. I hate to cut it short because it's so incredibly gorgeous, but I've only got a page left here, and I know you all have places to be. So let's finish up with Viktor Ullmann. Surprisingly, the number of compositions Ullmann wrote while imprisoned actually exceed his musical output written prior to his incarceration. It is evident that Ullmann was aware of what was in store for him on the eve of his transportation to Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. Ullmann sealed 23 of his scores, including a string quartet, piano sonatas, choral arrangements in Hebrew, Yiddish, and French, and German, as well as a complete text and score of Der Kaiser von Atlantis, into an airtight container, and entrusted them to his friend Dr. Emil Utitz. This parcel was then given to another friend, Dr. Hans Adler, in 1947. But these manuscripts sat nearly forgotten for over 2 decades in Dr. Adler's attic, when in 1972 the Czech government approached Julie Woodward to reconstruct Ullmann's opera Der Kaiser von Atlantis for performance. She in turn suggested her husband, Cary Woodward, for the project. Shortly after, the Czech government dropped the plan to produce the opera, but Woodward persisted, and a premiere was scheduled for May 1975 premiere at the Annenberg Theater in Philadelphia. However, a musician strike caused the cancellation of this production, and the work would later make its world premiere with text in English on the 16th of December 1975 by the Netherlands Opera Studio in Amsterdam. Since the premiere, Der Kaiser von Atlantis, the work has gained attention and has been recently performed in cities throughout Germany, Austria, Hungary, Poland, Portugal, Netherlands, and Boulder, Colorado. And the revival movement, not only in regard to Ullmann, but the music of this lost generation as a whole, has been gaining considerable attention ever since. While Ullmann's manuscripts are in the Paul Sacher Stiftung in Basel, Switzerland, Bürger, Bricht estates are among the collection of 40 plus similar collections at the Exiled Arte Archive in Vienna, founded and run by Dr. Georg Gruber and Dr. Michael Haas, where they are preserved, researched, and promoted. Negotiations are underway to get Walter Arlen's estate there as well, and I think that will probably happen within the next year. I don't know if I mentioned, but Walter Arlen only passed away. He was the last of that generation. He only passed away 2 years ago at the age of 103. And I had the great opportunity to meet him twice, and he was the sweetest man you'll ever meet. And you can hear from his works that translates into those beautiful, beautiful pieces. So thank you for your time. I hope this lecture has provided some insight into the great lost generation of composers and artists who, despite being suppressed and in some cases murdered by the genocidal Nazi regime, they managed to survive in spite of this ideology. These figures found new purpose in their adopted home countries and contributed greatly to the artistic and cultural life we all enjoy today. While the last member, I already mentioned that. So thank you for your attention, and I'd love to answer any questions if you do have some. And if you really are interested in Julius Burger, I have to plug my book that came out last year. It's available on all those things online. I'm going to leave you just with a tiny clip of this epic Julius Burger's Eastern Symphony. This is the last piece played on his return to Austria in 2023. And I think, to me, it says, I'm back. There we go. Thank you very much. Thank you. I know that was longer than 45 minutes for sure, but does anybody have any questions?
That section from your documentary was very moving. Is it possible for us to have some access to that?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. That's free on my website, rediscoveredbeauty.org. You can find it on there, also with other information about Julius Burger. I try and keep it updated, but I've been a bit behind the last month about upcoming concerts and whatnot. But it's free to watch on my website, so please enjoy. Is there anybody else? Yes? It's possible. I might have to do a bit more digging. It's highly possible, you know. I find these things come out of the woodworks, and I go make new connections and roads in.
My partner just wrote a book about the songs of Harold Arlen, and if there were such a relationship, he would know that.
Yeah, okay, well then, there we go. There we go, a definitive answer there.
Ask and answer.
Sorry?
Ask and answer.
Yeah, exactly. Anybody else? Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. If you do have any questions, you can reach me through my website, rediscoverbd.org as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being here today. How about another round of applause for all of our presenters? There is a QR code for a post-season survey in your program book, but you don't have to go looking for it because we will email it to you after the festival. And since you are the ones that are here at the symposium, I hope you will take a minute to fill it out and give us some feedback, because we are always looking for what we can do to improve things and give you what you're looking for. So when you get that email, please take a minute to fill it out, and I hope we see you up at Mackey tonight and tomorrow. Thank you.